Welcome to Literacy Talks, the podcast for literacy leaders and champions everywhere, brought to you by Reading Horizons. Literacy Talks is the place to discover new ideas, trends, insights, and practical strategies for helping all learners reach reading proficiency. Our hosts are Stacy Hurst, a professor at Southern Utah University and Chief Academic Advisor for Reading Horizons. Donnell Pons, a recognized expert and advocate in literacy, dyslexia, and special education. And Lindsay Kemeny, an elementary classroom teacher, author, and speaker. Now, let's talk literacy.
Welcome to this episode of Literacy Talks. I'm Stacy Hurst, and I'm joined this week by Lindsay Kemeny, and we're giving Donnell the day off. But we do have a special guest, Andrea Setmeyer. Thank you for joining us again. You're definitely an honorary host at this point.
I know. I'm here for it. Bring it on, especially if we're talking about reading assessment and instruction. So let's do it.
Yes, that is your jam. And as you know, if you've been listening to the podcast for a while, we had quite an amp up to the Reading League Summit, which was all about assessment. And so this episode, we will be recapping that summit. I was able to go and it was fantastic. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. And I actually don't think we could have such a good conversation without Andrea, because you were such an integral part of the whole thing. So thank you again for joining us today. Right away, Lindsay will know this. I sent a picture of the cookies. Cookies are important. And
cookies are important. That's right. Especially nerdy cookies.
Yes, because they said right on the cookie, I love data. It was so great. I saw people actually taking them off the table and putting them in their bags. Like, I've got to share these with people at home.
That's great. That's great.
So that was a solid choice. The other thing was there were many people in attendance. Andrea, what was the final count?
We had just under 800 people register, which is when you're thinking about an event like the summit, everybody's in one room. All of the events happen in one space. So that's a really large room. But it was really just electric to feel so many people together coming around, coming to the summit for the same purpose and having common goals. There's nothing like it.
So is this more than you've had in years past, or do you remember how many you had last year?
It's very similar. I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but we've always been between 500 and around 750. So it's really similar to the last couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was really great. And I have to give a shout out or lift up the design of the note-taking document. This is just, it was so well done. Lindsay, you would be so impressed. There was plenty of room to take notes, unless you take notes like I do. And then, I don't even I just filled pages and pages. But also in the back, speaking of all of the connections that you make, there was a space to write contact information of people that you met. And we met so many awesome people there and had great conversations around assessment. So I don't know if you get to see that when you're doing the behind the scenes things, Andrea, but there was a lot of that happening. So I thought was great.
I'm so glad. And I'm so glad you found value in that note catcher. As we're putting this together, we're putting ourselves in the seat of the learner. And we know it can be overwhelming to have 2 full days of learning. And so we do a lot of work leading up to the summit to make sure that the panelists align, that you're hearing some consistent messaging. And the note catcher was one way that we thought we could help folks process what they were learning, is having a space that already had some guiding questions for you, and would just hopefully help you keep track of what you're learning as the 2 days went on.
Yeah, it went by session. So it had the schedule in the very front, Lindsay. We like to just open it and see, right? It was so good.
And our listeners know, I talk about it every time. And obviously, I was not at the summit. If you're listening, you probably caught that. But I always appreciate when we have a paper manual. Everything is digital these days, but I still I like it in my hand. It's just easier for me to see the schedule, see what's going on. Yeah, so that's great.
So speaking of digital resources, this is one thing I also thought was brilliant about the guide is that right in the back, there's a QR code for the resource folder. And there are a lot of resources in that folder. And it was also nice to know that because as you're taking notes, you didn't feel the need to have so many screenshots, getting your phone out to say, I want to capture this. So also, well designed.
Thanks, Stacy. We had a lot of humility when we were planning this event, knowing that we weren't going to be able to cover every single thing that was important to talk about in a conversation around reading assessment. And so that was one way for us to help guide panelists. Like, we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about that, but if you send us the article, we'll put it in. And the people that tend to come to the Reading League events are the kind of people that will keep reading and keep learning. So that's encouraging that you found that valuable.
Yeah. And I actually, you and I had a brief conversation at the very end of the summit that we were talking about how people were saying this was a lot of good information packed into 2 days. But it was definitely not sit and get. Like, it is something that you're going to maximize your participation. And I know I already have, and I'm not even done processing everything that we learned and talked about. But that is where our activity as a learner is really going to benefit our practice, because there were so many anchor points that we can return to. We have the terminology, we have the context, which I think is key. Yeah. And that was one of the ways that it was designed. So we focused on student, classroom, school, district, and policy levels, right? Can you talk about how that, you had the theme of data and action, right, coming together? Yeah. Was that always the vision? How did that come to be?
Yeah, you really hit the nail on the head there. There's so many different angles with data, right? And I think that it's really reasonable that wherever you are in this literacy ecosystem, you have a different lens on data, right? A teacher wants something that is actionable, and that's so reasonable. The data that's in front of a teacher should be something that they can interpret and use to inform instruction. But when you're looking at the student level, like an individual student, you're often making some other decisions about, do we stay the course on this intervention or do we change it? And so there's different nuances when you're looking at an individual student, maybe at a data team meeting, right? A cross-functional data team meeting. And the district leader, principals, and at the district level, they have different questions they're trying to answer with data, as well as at the state level. And so really trying to highlight that none of those are wrong. They all just come at it with different strengths and are looking at slightly different parts of, or maybe different tests that we use to assess reading. And so we really did want to highlight that focus that you just articulated beautifully, but then also make sure that we didn't get stuck only talking about the numbers and only talking about data, but ask really every panelist and presenter to make some connections to instruction, talk about what intervention would align with this, what would be your next steps if you were analyzing this. And so that was also a part of the design.
Yeah, there were really a lot of great takeaways with that as part of the design. How did you curate that speaker lineup? How did you decide? And I mean, there were so many options, but you did great. They were all very stellar.
In true Reading League fashion, we built a league. We talked with a lot of people about what are the key misconceptions around data and assessment, who are the speakers and panelists that could both talk about research and make that connection to practice in a really meaningful way. And so we did a lot of conversation before we started sending out invitations. We also really wanted to make sure that educators had access to researchers directly, that they could hear from them about how they design and test reading assessments before they ever make their way into the classroom, and have an appreciation for that. And then always grounding that conversation in what's happening in real schools. So we asked folks like Margaret Goldberg to be a moderator who is a literacy coach and is living this every day, so that she could ground the conversation in real practice in real time with all of the limitations that come along with doing this work in schools. Yeah, I think those are the highlights of how we put it together. And we were just really thrilled that when we asked folks, that they said yes and were willing to share their time and their expertise with us in this really unique way.
Yeah. And maybe, I'm thinking about this too. Maybe we start kind of at the beginning and go through each of the parts of that 2 days. But speaking in the design of it as well, there were different types of presentations, right? So we had the keynote, but then there were also panels. Margaret, like you mentioned, was a moderator for one of them. And then we had data workshops too, which was, I thought, really awesome. So did I miss any?
No, that was
type.
it.
Okay. So each one of those very valuable. And I really thought the flow of how it went. So we started out, obviously, Dr. Maria Murray and Andrea set the stage for us. One thing that Dr. Murray said in her intro, she told the story of the Reading League, and she talked about how it is our job. It's our job to teach kids how to read. But the other thing that she mentioned is that policy doesn't teach. Andrea, you and I talked about that briefly as well. And I thought that was powerful. And Andrea, you really set the stage for why assessment is important to focus on. And one thing that stood out to me about what you said was, because you repeated it, you said, did they learn? Did they learn? Did they learn? What else did you want to lift up about that intro?
Thanks for that. No, that's exactly right. I think we talk a lot about instruction, as we should as educators. But when you start to think about data and assessment, it just helps us shift that focus to the learner. Did they learn it? Did they learn it? Can they do it now? Can they remember it tomorrow? Can they apply it next week when they see a new word? Like, those are all really important questions too. And getting the right tool at the right time helps us answer that and make sure that we're supporting all kids in a way that's equitable and leads to success. So I'm glad you picked up on that. That's perfect. The only other thing in the opening that I shared was we have a lot of misconceptions on assessment. And so the National Council for Teacher Quality in 2023 did a pretty robust survey of teacher preparation programs, and they put out a list of how often higher education teacher preparation programs were still teaching practices that are not aligned to science. And when you looked at the list of, I believe it was 9 practices, 4 of them, so almost half, were assessment practices. And if we're changing our instruction and doing really solid, explicit, systematic, cumulative instruction, but we're not changing our assessment practices to monitor that, it's a real disconnect. It's a mismatch that's really going to harm our efforts to change the system. And so our invitation was to look at those assessment practices to help you get where you're going faster. If we can change those assessment practices at the same time as our instruction, you will get better outcomes faster.
Yeah. Lindsay, you can probably relate to that as a teacher. I'm sure your assessment practices have changed over time as you learn more about it.
Yeah. And one thing I was just thinking about is how it's so important to have both informal and formal assessments. I mean, as a teacher, you're constantly doing these little informal checks, like all the time. But when I'm doing that, so let's say it's the dictation part of my phonics lesson, and I'm always like walking around while I'm doing that and checking who has the word, who doesn't, who do I need to be like, oh, remember, how do we spell ch after a short vowel or whatever. But then I can't be everywhere at once. So I might not catch some that maybe are looking more at their partner. I'll catch a lot, but I won't catch everyone, which is why it's really, because they'll hurry and change it when they see their partner, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's also important to really have those more formal checks where I'm like, we have up our little privacy folders and then I can see, or even just with progress monitoring, we use Acadience or Dibble's Next. Of course, I'm listening to students read every single day. But when I have that timed component, and when I kind of listen to several of my students read the same passage, and I might notice something where, oh my gosh, they keep skipping words. Whereas when we're just reading the story, I didn't really notice that. But here I did, So I just think there's so many different types of assessment, and they're all so valuable.
Lindsay, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's a really good perspective to think about. And I think we heard that at the summit in 2 different ways. So one, Dr. Jessica Toss brought that up, and she really highlighted and validated that type of informal, in-the-moment assessment that teachers do. And she talked about how you are constantly monitoring progress in the classroom setting to adjust in real time. And she called that monitoring progress versus progress monitoring. That is something we do when a student needs intervention. And that is a little bit more systematic and a little bit more standardized for really good reasons. And she kind of talked about both of them side by side, which I thought was helpful. And then Dr. Schatzsnyder at the beginning also talked about that a little bit, where he said measurement is not the same as assessment. Like a number is not the end all be all. Assessment is really that whole picture of the student skill that teachers are usually really skilled at bringing to the table when we're talking about the numbers, but also sharing your observations and classroom data sets and samples, and all of those pieces go into assessment.
Yeah, he was a great keynote, and he used a lot of words. I bet if we did a word bubble, you'd see things like he introduced words like specificity and wow, there's another S one. What's the other one?
Sensitivity.
Thank you, sensitivity and base rate and all kinds of new terminology for some people, I'm sure. But one thing he said that was highly relatable, and he was putting that different data in context, and he did such a good job of communicating those really technical terms and teaching us. I mean, he met the goal that you had for making it actionable. But one thing he said when he was talking about progress monitoring is the variance. He said it's an imperfect measure, right? It's one measure, but it's imperfect. And he said when you're monitoring progress over time, I think he was talking about oral reading fluency at the time, and charting it, he said that can be frustrating for a teacher. You can have as much as 20 words per minute difference from one time to the next. And the way he related it was, he said, it can look like the data points can look like a drunken man wandering through the forest. I thought I have seen that before. Yes, it can. But he also talked about things like base rate. He sort of addressed all the levels, right? Like the individual student, the class, the school, and the systems kind of thing too. But kind of opened our eyes to look at how many students in that system are meeting the benchmark and how many are not. And that's an important thing. That's the base rate. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yep. And Dr. Schatzsnyder is one of the directors at the Florida Center for Reading Research, and he's a statistician. He's a data guy. He made a joke that they don't let him out of the data mines to come talk to the people very often. But what I was really hoping that his presentation would do is just pull back the curtain a little bit on how reading tests are developed, how many years they spend in development and pilot phases, working in schools. Is this actionable? Does this make sense? Do we have our reporting system right? So that teachers have a little bit of an appreciation for why things are the way they are, right? We know that reading comprehension is the goal. So why don't we just have a good reading comprehension CBM that we can pull out and use? Well, because reading comprehension depends on a lot of things, including the particular passage that's in front of the student. And so we see variability, and we've tried to overcome it with different measurement principles and developing multiple tests for multiple areas. But that's really important to understand the design and why we shift screening measures at different ages. Like, there's really careful, thoughtful research that's been developed over time of why we do the things that we do. And I'm hoping that that's a helpful message for teachers to understand.
I do think there will be more teachers asking for technical manuals for the assessments that they give. Yes. I was so overjoyed when I heard him say that, because that is an important piece that we overlook. And there's a lot of stuff in a technical manual that it's hard to read. But he then said, you get that information about the sensitivity and the specificity, and you know your base rate, and then you can use that collectively to know how this data applies to your specific outcomes, which will lead to changes that matter for your students. So, and he shared a formula.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, which was a big formula. And I don't want the takeaway to be that every single teacher needs to know how to calculate this. Like, that's not the message. True. But that somebody at the district level needs to be attending to these things, needs to be reviewing the technical manuals. Invite your friendly school psychologist or speech language pathologist to the table when you're having those conversations. It is important to attend to your unique population and which assessments you're picking. But I don't think that every teacher needs to be an expert on those things. I just wanted to help grow an appreciation for how complex it is.
Yes, and that definitely did. And then the panels, In fact, speaking of that, and I'm not going to remember. I think there was a moderator, Brian McMahon. What is his title? Because speaking to the fact that somebody at the district needs to be on that, his title is very cool.
So he's the director of accountability at Indian River County School District in Florida. And we had been to Vero Beach, Florida, where his school is, and heard him speak at a conference earlier this year. And just really appreciate the whole school's culture around data and how they use it. In particular, how the district team really sets themselves up to gather the data, analyze it, make sure that it's presented in a meaningful format so that principals and teachers can take action on it. So the district really takes some of that collection and analysis part so that the people who are really good at the teaching and the analysis can do that part. So, he was great. They've done a lot of work in Indian River and seen a lot of success. And so it was cool to have him be a part of that and share how data has been a part of their journey.
Yeah. Lindsay, do you have somebody at your district that is, their role is specific to data?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have like an assessment person. Although now that I think about it, well, we had like some changes, and then I think like the responsibilities kind of merged. And I'm trying to remember if they still are. Like I know the person, I just don't know if they also have some other things to their role as well. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes those roles can be like testing coordinators, and they're managing the state test and doing a lot of that really important work that does take time. But I think the model that Brian was sharing is really some of the district folks would come to the building level data meetings, would be the ones to help facilitate and bring the data, which is a really cool way to think about this shared accountability for the results.
Yeah. Ours would, and at least once, but I feel like a couple times a year they would meet with us and go over our data.
Great.
Yeah, I would love to see more of that. I think that is an important role to have, and somebody that has the background to know what to look for in that data. Yeah. Speaking of those panels, they were very actionable, and there were how many? 3 panels or 4?
There were
4, right? Can you talk about the panels and I felt like there were so many moments during those panels that were relatable to people, but how did you put them together? What did you witness while we were at the summit during those panels? I think I was so invested in what they were talking about that maybe I wasn't paying attention to how people were responding.
Yeah, of course. I'll take them kind of one at a time, Stacy, and then you can jump in with any highlights that you noticed. But the first panel was taking action on classroom data. So I already mentioned Margaret Goldberg was the moderator for that one, who's a current literacy coach in California. And she opened with just a really powerful message to teachers about how she used to think about assessment and how she thinks about it now. And so she just talked about that she thought her job was to give students access to text that would help move them through. And she was hesitant to use something that was standardized because she knew her teachers best and she really valued that interactive reading experience. But now that she has learned about some of the research and seen the power of having a universal screener early on, she had this message about, now I see tests are tools, right? I can trust these tools because it's giving me accurate information that then I can really use in my teaching. But that takes knowledge and time to build. And so I really appreciated her opening message about that. Yeah. We asked each of our panelists then to just answer one essential question, and they packed a lot in there, but Matt Burns talked a little bit about class-wide intervention, and Lindsay, he referenced you a couple of times in the work that you've done with that PALS class-wide reading fluency and word shrinking activity, paragraph shrinking activity, and just talked about you get the screening data, but your next step is not to automatically sort kids for intervention. It's really to look at tier 1 needs and how can you implement some class-wide intervention that might reduce the risk for some of the students so that you can provide more intensive intervention for students that need it.
Yeah. One thing that he said I thought was really insightful too was a systems level recommendation, but he pointed out to look at the median score. And if it is below the criterion, then you have a systems problem, right? Then you really do need to focus on support in that tier 1 situation. And that's where context matters. And I feel like these panels were so good to always put it in context, because a previous speaker had said to keep an eye on the average, but he was referring to the individual student. So just those nuances helped, I think, alleviate some of that confusion. But I heard many people mention that as insightful.
He is so great. And that's nice. He called me out, but I learned all of it from him. It's like his work. Yeah. And I so appreciate because I feel like he is a researcher who really puts himself out there and makes himself accessible to us as teachers so that, we can apply, what they're doing. So I appreciate all the work he's done on that.
When students need support, every moment of instruction counts. Ascend Focus by Reading Horizons is an adaptive K-12 intervention that identifies skill gaps and delivers individualized, developmentally aligned support, helping students accelerate progress and reach grade-level performance. Built on the same proven method and trusted foundational software educators have relied on for over 40 years, Ascend Focus makes targeted interventions simple, effective, and measurable. Ascend Focus will be available for district and school implementation beginning with the 2026 school year. Visit readinghorizons.com/ascend to learn more and sign up for updates.
The rest of that classroom panel then looked at language comprehension and language needs. And so we were having a lot of questions around assessment of language because we sort of have an MTSS system developed for word recognition, but what does that look like when you think about language comprehension or screening for language skills? And so Dr. Tiffany Hogan gave us just a quick overview of where we're at in the field. And we do have some language screeners, and we don't quite have the system developed as well as we do for word recognition yet. And so that was kind of a call to action to pay more attention to language comprehension and an acknowledgement that we don't have the system built out exactly like we do for word recognition yet. But I loved her message about, we thought older students struggled after 3rd and 4th grade because text got harder. But actually, when we looked at the data, we saw they were late identified for language difficulty. And as the text got more complex, they couldn't understand some of the vocabulary or syntax or grammar. And that was really why they hit that wall and started struggling. And if we had screened them early, we might have been able to provide better intervention. Yeah.
And one other thing I really liked about what she shared was, in the absence of a screener that that a teacher would be familiar with, ways to quickly assess your students, including things like sentence repetition, and to know if there are some red flags for that. I do think we're going to have more of a focus on that, but I think that panel did a really good job of really highlighting the difference between code-based assessment and instruction and language-based or meaning-based. And one thing that, again, the actionables were so understandable. And I think people could get quickly overwhelmed if they realize, oh my gosh, I don't know about language comprehension. How do we know? But they very succinctly said, we need to really focus on differentiating instruction for the code base, which I feel like most of us have a good foundation for that. And then just making sure that we're exposing and highlighting and lifting up those meaning focused in, like, not even interventions, even on instruction in our day-to-day routines.
And those language difficulties, especially in the upper grades, will really become apparent with their writing. I mean, we're going to need to control for the foundational writing skills, right? The spelling and the handwriting fluency or the typing fluency. And then if they're still struggling, there's, that's another area we can be looking at for that language. Of course, in the lower grades, they're all learning those foundational skills. So we really got to depend on other things as well. But
and with syntax, you can see that early on too. They highlighted that.
Do we know what percentage of students have a language developmental disorder?
She did
We
mention
do.
that.
Tiffany talked about that. It's similar to the number of students identified with dyslexia. When you really do a systematic screening and look at it, they show up in similar numbers. And so it's just as prevalent and really important for us to pay attention to. But it may not look like screening 3 times a year the same way we do with early literacy, right? There may be other ways of doing that early screening and then monitoring students who are at risk.
And I feel like there's a statistic where about half of our students with dyslexia also have developmental language.
Yes, they overlap a lot.
Yeah.
And then that was really the final panelist, Dr. Sarah Siegel. She was sharing Dr. Carol Connor's research that some kids will need systematic explicit instruction in both. And how are you providing that double dose or that extra instruction to make sure that you're intervening early on both domains? Great point.
And I imagine there's quite a range too with the language, because I see that in my classroom. I've had students that come in saying 2-word sentences in first grade. And then you have others that are saying full sentences, but, really struggling with like pronouns or, other things. And so there's just this wide range. It's interesting.
It is. And Dr. Hogan also said, yes, we can create language-rich environments. And yes, students can benefit from being around higher level language. And some students really do need systematic, explicit, direct language instruction. And so being able to attend to both. But I appreciate that she lifted that up.
Yeah. And she broke it down like word level, sentence level, context level. So it was not overwhelming to people who were listening.
That's good.
That was great. Yeah, that was the first Taking Action panel. And that one was titled Taking Action on Classroom Data. And then the next Taking Action panel was on student data. And Sarah Brown moderated that. Talk to us about that. And that's where Jessica was talking too about her fascinating work.
That's right. Yep. So the thing that I really took away from Sarah's opening for this panel was thinking about the purpose of our instruction. And so she had a slide where she had all of these questions that data can answer, right? Like, is this student making enough progress? Is this student at risk? All of these different questions at different levels. And then she sorted them into the purpose, right? And so if your purpose is who's at risk, you need a validated screener to answer that question. And so again, just acknowledging that there's not one assessment, but it's a system of assessments working together, and that you have to pick the right tool to answer the right question, or else the data won't be impactful. So I really appreciated that opening and how she really grounded it in what's the purpose of your assessment. And then we had Dr. Lillian Duran present about assessment for multilingual learners. And she just highlighted it right off the gate by saying, we're not talking about something completely different, right? We're still measuring language and literacy for those students, but we're going to see a higher number of students who are multilingual learners identified as at risk if we only use assessments that are given in English. And so we really need to be thinking about getting good measures in place that can capture some of the language skills in their native language and look at that. But she also was really clear that we don't need to test their literacy skills in their native language if they haven't been exposed to instruction, right? Reading and writing are learned skills. And so for multilingual learners, yes, get good information about their language in both languages or 3 languages, but only assess literacy skills, word reading skills, if they've had instruction in that language. That's where the language of instruction really matters.
Yeah. And so that's like a lot your younger grades, right? But versus the older grades, definitely be looking at their native language literacy skills as well, because most likely they've had instruction there.
Yeah, and I feel like it came up multiple times on that panel that's where teacher knowledge is very beneficial when you're making those decisions.
Yeah, that's right. And then we went into Dr. Jessica Tost's panel presentation that I already talked about a little bit, where she was really comparing monitoring progress in the classroom that you do every day versus progress monitoring that is really more intensive for students that are receiving intervention. But one other thing that she talked about was really the grain size of the data that we're collecting, right? So we always have this kind of large scale data that we use to make predictions in places like meteorology, what's the weather coming next week, or in economics. But we do the same thing with literacy data. So screening data is that large grain size data. It's just telling us broadly who's at risk, who's not, are we heading in the right direction? But that additional data granularity really helps you identify your students' needs, and particularly for students who are receiving intervention or at risk, you really need to get down into those specific skills in both word recognition and language comprehension.
Yeah. And for those of you who've been listening, we had Dr. Tost on a previous episode. And I think the example that came up in that episode was our retirement investments.
Yes.
That we, those broad strokes kind of tell us trajectories. Yeah, that was a great panel. The other panels were taking action on district data. We already talked about Brian McMahon. And anything else on those panels? That was Kelly Powell-Smith, Kim St. Martin, and Alex Shelton.
Yeah, so again, we had some of the language conversation threaded throughout. So Kelly Powell-Smith did a really nice job of talking about some of the measures we have to evaluate vocabulary, morphology, syntax, but really calling us always to be so efficient, right? We don't have to give every student those language measures 3 times a year. And then I was thrilled to have Dr. Alex Shelton with us to talk a little bit about what happens beyond grade 3. So much of our assessment focus is on pre-K through 2 or pre-K through 3, and really thinking about what does that look like as students go on. You don't always need to screen every single student 3 times a year, right? That we're now looking for growth in skills, and then those early warning systems of identification for who might be at risk, and then screening or doing some more diagnostic for the ones that are flagged there.
Yeah, and the final panel was about policy. And I half expected, it was also towards the end of the day. So I really thought, oh, we're going to see people just make a mass exodus, but they didn't. Like, there were so many people so engaged. And one thing that I think caught their attention, Dr. Tim Odegaard started that panel, and Dr. Kemeny Burke was the moderator, so that was also powerful. But he shared a personal story about how legislation went into policy while he was a young child, but he never benefited from it because of the lag that it takes from policy to practice. That was I thought that was a good way to set that panel up.
Yeah, that's right. And I think it also just acknowledges that we're teaching in a complex ecosystem, right? Like, there's a particular classroom that's nested in a particular school, in a district, in a community that's impacted by state policy. And so at every layer, you have some perspectives on assessment that can impact what actually has to happen in the classroom. And so there's been some really positive things that have happened in the world of assessment policy across the country, where we're paying more attention to early identification for dyslexia. But it's not always aligned to what the researchers would say is the purest way to screen for reading difficulties. And so we were able to talk a little bit about what's working well, what's not working well, and just call the field forward to continue to evolving, especially thinking about things like screening for developmental language disorder. That could be something that states add on and or refine some of their dyslexia screening bills, depending on how well it's working and what we're learning as research continues to evolve. I was thrilled to have Dr. Katie Jenner is the Secretary of Education for Indiana there to really talk about Indiana's approach in leveraging what other states are learning. We didn't recreate the wheel. We really leaned into conversations with state leaders in other places to see what was working, and then started from there and hope to pay that knowledge forward for other states.
Yeah, she was talking. I remember the thought, I wish every state could hear this because I think sometimes we waste a lot of resources trying to recreate the wheel.
Yeah.
Sometimes we go backwards.
And then Jill Pentamonti closed us out, which was great because she works for the National Center for Intensive Intervention, or NCII, and has been a part of creating those tools charts that we use to evaluate screening tools. And we heard NCII tools charts at almost every panel throughout the 2 days. And so she actually closed us out by just grounding us in how they were developed, what they're meant for, what the limitations are, and really encouraged us to think about them as a starting point, not the end all be all for selecting a screener.
Yeah, again, that perspective and context I felt was very valuable. Okay, now we'll shift a little bit to the workshop the
Yeah, I'm
workshops, there
curious
were,
about this.
it was great fun. I tell you, it really was. And the first one was led by Andrea Setmeyer, who also was a previous guest. Her first workshop was on taking action on classroom data. And this is where the program really was highlighted, because there were some guiding questions already provided right in the program. And then there was actual data that we got to analyze and look at, because a school or district donated that data. Of course, it was de-identified, but I thought that was powerful. And that one was the one right before lunch. And I feel like, was it? I don't
Workshop
remember.
1 was at the end of day 1. It was the last thing we did as people were leaving. And then, yes, I think workshop 2 was right before lunch on day 2.
Okay. But I think that was really well planned, because that carried the conversation forward with our practitioner friends. And I think that was a really good opportunity for that.
So you took data. Were you looking at district-wide trends, schools trends, classroom trends, or?
In the first workshop, it was very specific for student data first and then classroom level data. So we looked at 2 different students, and we were looking for indicators for either of those code-based or meaning-based skills, and then what to do for instruction for those specific students, but then to put them in the context of a whole class and to look at data that way too. Mm-hmm. What else would you say about that, Andrea?
That's exactly right. It was just really important for us to ground it in real school data, right? Like, this is what it looks like in real time, and have her talk us through kind of mental model for us what I see when I look at this data. So she talked a little bit about the difference between the word recognition skills and the language comprehension, and how she would think about integrating those 2 data points together. She talked a little bit about which data point to answer which question, right? Like, the most predictive of risk is usually that composite score, but looking at accuracy versus words read correct per minute for example, will tell you a different story about how to analyze the data. And so really walking us through that large predictive piece of a screener, and then how you might think about using it a little bit diagnostically. And then, yes, putting those 2 students that we really looked at carefully in the context of a whole class. Well, are they significantly different from their peers, or does the whole class need this type of data and instruction? And so that was really a helpful piece of it too.
Yeah, and I feel like the composite score came up in multiple places. But am I remembering this correctly? Somebody was saying that teachers basically don't look at the composite, and they look more deeper into the data, and the composite score is useful for some things, but not everything.
Yeah, that's right. And that makes so much sense. Like, I want teachers to be laser focused on instructional moves and getting data that can help them make those instructional moves. But I also need them to understand how the test was created, and that it's that composite score. Usually, read your test manual, but usually it's the composite score that's most predictive of risk. So we still want to pay attention to that when we're looking at class-wide needs, when we're thinking about who might need intervention and diagnostic.
Yeah, which goes back to that dynamic nature, right? Because depending on developmentally where a student is, one aspect of a test can be more heavily weighted, like the word recognition fluency for a first grader compared to, they don't even give that test in like 4th or 5th grade typically. But and the composite score is more sensitive to that kind of a measure. So I thought that was insightful too. And Lindsay, I think you do this all the time, because you post your data sometimes on social media. So you're always in it.
I do in a certain group, I think. I don't think I just do it out to the masses, because you never know. But I mean, of course there's no names or anything, but yeah.
I guess I see it. I don't pay attention to what group it's in. Yeah. I just go, oh, there's Lindsay's cool data. But what's your relationship like with the composite score? Out of curiosity.
Well, I mean, I'm definitely looking overall, and I'm kind of looking at those trends across the year, but I always want to look, more carefully, I guess, at the components of it, right? Mm-hmm. Because I can see, this student was red, but guess what? they were green for these 2 measures. And then it was these 2 measures that pulled them down. And it kind of helps me know, what they need. I mean, obviously I have to dive deeper, but gives me a general idea like we were talking about. So.
And this helped me to lift up too something that Dr. Tost had said earlier. She said, just take what the student actually said during those oral reading fluency or word recognition tests, and then analyze the patterns, which is next to the difference between phonological and phonemic awareness. The one thing that I'm trying to get into my students' brains, look at every little piece and you can start to see these patterns emerge. And I thought that was a good way to look at that, Lindsay, like how you're looking at data that way too.
I especially love middle of the year, because middle of the year data, then I can really do something about it. Mm-hmm. And I love like when I see, I mean, of course, my goal is to have everyone have well above average growth. When you look at like the pathways of progress, it's not always going to happen. But if I have everyone has above or well above, and at MOI, I had like 2 that had typical progress. And I kind of like being like, okay, let me think about what I could do for those 2 to get, to increase that. And, and sometimes it's really simple, and it's just like, okay, when we're doing partner reading, I'm making sure I'm over there a little bit, making sure they're on task or whatever. Or I'm just going to make sure I'm giving them a little more feedback. A lot of times it's smaller things, but it's really fun then at the end of the year to see, oh yes, now they're above average growth.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. In the second data workshop, it was focused on building level data. And what you were saying, Lindsay, just reminded me, they talked about a specific vocabulary measure. She gave examples of a school that totally moved their data based on those routines that they just put into their instruction, and there was proof of it, right? Mm-hmm. I thought that was really powerful too.
Isn't that cool? And that goes back to like that collective efficacy of like, don't just use data to like have an I gotcha moment with teachers. Show them that when their instruction changes, that you can see it, right? Like this is so powerful to see those student outcomes and to celebrate it and then talk as a team. Okay, what did we do differently that moved the needle on this particular data point? Why are our kids all of a sudden more accurate with their word reading skills? And let's reflect and go backwards. I love that connection.
Yeah. And it's not a gotcha, right? We got to use it to improve. So even at the end of the year, but like I have one student who had better growth the first half of the year than the second half of the year. And the only thing that really changed is the way our school was doing our tiered systems of support and the way she was being supported in this like quote unquote tier 2 intervention kind of space. And so what I'm trying to do is figure out exactly what and how many students were in that group. And I'm really worried about this certain child, and I want to like set them up for success next year. So I'm trying to kind of like figure it out so I can make recommendations for next year in how she's supported.
You're such a scientist, Lindsay, right? Like that's exactly the work you should be doing. I love that.
Yeah. And how that gets communicated from year to year for that particular student would be important too, for somebody on that school level. Andrea, so many great things came from this summit. Was there something that I'll just share with you like the conversations that I heard at lunch and after and dinner too. And by the way, there were a couple of awards given at the summit as well to Dr. Linda Farrell and Triple SR, which I thought was really great. And this might seem unrelated, but I'll make it make sense. I had the opportunity to have dinner with Dr. Linda Farrell after the first night. And we were in a restaurant, and some vendors, which I think is worth mentioning too, they were in the same room. Mm-hmm. These are the people that are going to take back to their companies and their products some of the things that they heard. And I think that's a powerful part of the design of that. But we had some vendors from Super Kids come and invite us to a free dinner. And we had really great conversation about the summit that day. So you had Linda Farrell and then a couple of us practitioners and some vendors. And I think that was a really good example of how bringing all of those people together really facilitated conversations around assessment and instruction that you don't typically have the opportunity to do otherwise. And I think those conversations can carry forward as well. So I don't know how much of that you got to see, Andrea, but it was happening. So
I'm so glad to hear it. I love that. Thanks, Stacy.
and I know we talked about the number of attendees, but could you tell us, do we have data on the makeup of them? How many were district people, teachers?
It's primarily educators, so largely elementary school educators, but there was maybe almost a third that were in leadership in some way, either a coach or a principal, a district leader. So it does vary, and we hope that there was some messages there for everybody, that you could really hear something that you needed to move forward, but also get an appreciation for why district leaders are looking for data in a slightly different way than classroom teachers.
Which kind of leads me to the question, like, what did you hope attendees would leave talking about or take with them?
Yeah. A couple of things. Like, one, I hope that we cleared up some myths. So we haven't talked about it yet on the podcast, but we talked a lot about those leveled reader assessments. That A to Z assessment is not being valid or reliable for a purpose of assessment. And so we talked about busting that myth. And then Dr. Truckenmiller also talked about Lexile scores. Those feel so easy to report to parents, but it's really, again, not a good, solid indicator of reading proficiency or reading growth. And so really trying to think carefully about the tools that we pick. So the myth busting, I was really pleased to see. I was also really glad to have some questions that got us thinking about how to integrate language assessment and foundational word recognition skill assessment, and thinking about having the conversation on integrating and paying attention to both in our instruction. That was really important for us to lift up. And I heard it, I think, at every panel. And then really at the end of the day, we didn't talk about Dr. Archer's workshop, but she really grounded us in an honest look at our reading skills, right? If you're looking at students' data, also we have to have that honest look at our instruction. And are we providing the type of high quality instruction at every tier, at every level, that's most likely to have an impact? So that was a really refreshing message in a day filled with numbers to really talk about instruction with Dr. Archer.
Yeah, and Lindsay and I both attended her academy. She had us take track of her opportunities, her students' opportunities to respond. And that's really what she focused on, because it was a high leverage practice. Sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to add, like, it's up to us to bring the programs to life. And so we have these programs, and yes, hopefully we are provided with good, strong, evidence-based programs. But regardless, you can't just stand and deliver this program. It requires a lot, all those things that Dr. Archer talks about, and you're constantly monitoring, you're checking, and you're not just saying, well, the lesson says to go on, so I'm going on. If you're pulling students back that still need more support with certain skills or whatever, like, I just think there's a science to it. It's like the secret sauce, what she talks about, plus the knowledge.
And the way she models it when she's teaching us as adults. And then I had the opportunity to sit next to her for one of the days, and she's taking notes on everybody else's sessions. Like, she just models that really quintessential teacher and learner at everything that she does.
Yeah,
and amazing. She was really well received. She got a standing ovation for her part too, and I thought that was really powerful. And a personal example, Lindsay, because you've been through the academy, but one follow-up that our state had us do, I had a colleague come in and keep tally how many opportunities to respond my students had, and I knew that I had improved on that after I attended the academy, but I think it's powerful to see the data. And the takeaway was that students need about 6 to 7 opportunities to respond per. What was the time, Lindsay? Do you remember? Sorry.
She usually says 3 to 5 per minute.
Per minute,
That's if they're quick, short, and the same responses. Obviously, longer or written responses are going to be less than that.
So to quantify that, I thought was powerful. And of course, we watched her do that. It was fantastic. This time has gone by so quickly. I feel like we could continue to talk about this. That summit is going to live on in lots of things that those of us who attended have to process and continue to learn. How can listeners who weren't there, Andrea, stay connected to this work and future summits?
Yeah. So to stay connected with the work of the Reading League and future summits, we haven't announced a summit yet for next year, but we'll announce that on our newsletter and on social media. So if you're not subscribed yet to our free monthly newsletter, sign up there. We'll also be publishing a blog soon with some of the content highlights. So if you want to read about each panel and a little bit of the content that was shared, we will be sharing that freely very soon. So you can follow the newsletter or social media to get that. But then I also just wanted to say how much we appreciate being a part of the conversation on assessment as part of your podcast over the last few episodes. And so we shared a freebie with everybody at the summit that I want to give to your listeners as well. So it's a ebook. So it's a flip book that you see digitally that has 3 of the assessment articles that you all have been talking about from the Reading League Journal with a discussion guide that you can use in professional learning communities or professional learning in your school. And so we'll link that in the show notes. And if people want to really dive into assessment, that's one really good place to start.
What a gift, and totally actionable too.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And then if you want to do something paid too, I got to put a plug into Reading Assessment Done Right is the book by Stephanie Stoller and Kate Wynn, which is fantastic. And I think pairing it with this free resource that you're giving so generously from the Reading League, amazing. You could like dive deep into those topics this summer, which would be incredible. Although I will say I really want schools, like I think it would be amazing for them to dive into these this together, like throughout the year, and do like book study, deep dive into assessment would be great.
I do too, Lindsay. And I was so encouraged to have 800 people come to Syracuse, New York to learn more about assessment and data.
Yeah.
Like I really think it is worth our time to get right and to think about where research is at for assessment in addition to instruction. So maybe this is the year. I keep saying it's the year for assessment.
Let's do it.
Which is good because it guides so much of what we do. And not only does it help move the dial, but we would have evidence that the dial moved.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well said.
Yeah. So I hope, Andrea, that you take back to the people who were involved in the summit just great gratitude and for the hard work that they did and all the things that we'll continue to learn from it. In line with the Reading League mission of disseminating knowledge that is reliable and aligned with the science of learning and the science of reading. So thank you so much. And thank you again for joining us. We've loved having you on the episodes that we've had previous. And Lindsay, thanks for your contributions to the topic of assessment. I'm sorry that you couldn't be there this year either, but
I was giving assessments probably at the time. I was doing
ironically. Yes.
That's right.
Well, and I think we haven't, all 3 of us have never been at a summit together. So maybe we could make that as a goal at some point.
I love that. 2027. I'm here for it.
There we go. Okay. Well, and thanks to our listeners for your interest in making a difference in the lives of students and helping anybody improve their literacy, right? We all can do that. And hopefully you'll join us for our next episode of Literacy Talks.
Thanks for joining us today. Literacy Talks comes to you from Reading Horizons, where literacy momentum begins. Visit readinghorizons.com/literacy talks to access episodes and resources to support your journey in the science of reading.